2 more chapters. Now this one is actually quite long, so I'm going to try and go through it kind of fast so that we can hopefully try and get through it all in one sitting and really just kind of hit the highlights on it. But you may want to go back and just read the chapters for yourself a little bit better. But again, I'm going to try and go through it kind of quick because it is pretty long. So community and ecosystem and ecology. So lots going on with this chapter. So let's go through it kind of quick. Ecology of communities, community development, dynamics of ecosystems, ecology, consequences of climate change. So community is an assemblage of populations of different species interacting with one another within an environment. Species richness is really kind of like the diversity and the composition, and then species diversity includes both species richness and the abundance of the different species. So we can see here the community structure. You're going to have different animals depending on the type of environment. So if you have an environment like this, you're going to have more squirrels and wolves. If you have a rainforest like, you're going to have more sloths and these kinds of squirrels. So species composition, a coniferous forest has a composition different from a tropical rainforest because different habitats have different types of animals, and species diversity is a listing of the species in a community with relative abundance. So what numbers are available. The greater the species richness and the more even the distribution, the greater the species diversity. So composition is like what types. The diversity is how many different types are there. So a habitat is the area where an organism lives. Think of it as like the animal's home. And an ecological niche is the role a species plays in its community. So the niche is the animal's specific role that it's playing within its home. Like, what is it doing? So the meeting the energy, the nutrients, and the survival demands. So fundamental niche is like the abiotic needs, and the realized niche is set of conditions under which it exists in nature when adverse biotic conditions are present. So the fundamental niche is larger than the realized niche overall. So here's some examples between some laboratory populations of Paramecium, population density, and then over time. So this is grown separately, and then grow together. So grown separately, you can see this one kind of has an S-shaped curve, and this one has more of a more steady curve. And then when they're growing together, there's more of a competition here, and this one doesn't do as well because this one is more outcompeted by the Aurelia. Now, the competitive exclusion principle is no two species can indefinitely occupy the same niche at the same time because one is going to outcompete the other because they are needing the same resources. Resource partitioning is the appropriation of resources in order to decrease competition between the species. And then character displacement. Characters tend to become more divergent when populations belong to the same community than when they are isolated. Characteristics tend to become, I thought that sounded weird. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Characteristics tend to become more divergent when populations belong to the same community when they are isolated. So when isolation happens, the characteristics become more divergent. So that is a good example is like the Galapagos Island finches. So the isolation causes the beaks to become different over time. So the beak shape on the different islands because they have been isolated on those islands. Niche specialization among the 5 species of warblers, different levels because they live in different part of the trees, so they are going to be able to adjust to whichever tree they live in. Barnacles will also be able to adjust depending on which area they live in. These are going to live in the high tide area, so as the tide goes out, they will be exposed to the surface, and so as they get exposed, they will have different characteristics that allow them to survive being exposed to the environment. And these deeper ones aren't exposed as often, so they're going to have different characteristics that help them to survive in water constantly. Predator-prey interactions. Now these are interesting interactions. So as the prey increases, the predators are going to increase. But as the predator increases, then they're going to eat more prey, and the prey are eventually going to decline. Well, as the prey declines, then the predators are going to decline because there's not as much to eat. But then when the predators go down, the prey are going to start to increase because there's not as much to eat them. Well, then that means that now there's more food for the predators, so the predators are going to start to go up, and then that means they eat more prey. So it's kind of like a cycle back and forth. So they kind of go back and forth. And hopefully there's a graph coming up. Yes, there's a graph coming up that'll show that interaction. They bounce back and forth between them. So as the prey go up, there's more for the predators, and that allows the predators to eat more, but then they eat too much, and then the prey go down, but then the predators go down, and so there's a lot of back and forth. It all comes back to this thing called carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is how much the environment can sustain healthy, and that's kind of like the balance of the environment, what the environment can healthy sustain. That balance is achieved, and so you're going to have like a lot of wiggle room around that balance, but that's what the carrying capacity is that balance. So predator and prey populations may fluctuate in size, but what we're going to see is that balance. So the lynx is the blue and the snowshoe hare is the purple. So as the prey increases, the predator is going to increase, but as the predator increases, it's eating more and more, the prey is going to drop. So then the predator drops, but as the predator drops, there's less for it to eat, so the prey is going to increase, which causes the predator to increase, but then as the predator increases, the prey drops. So you can see that they kind of follow each other in this pattern, an up and down kind of pattern, and they are basically going to follow each other over time, back and forth. Now, prey has a lot of defenses: heightened senses, speed, protective armor. Sometimes they'll have protective spines or thorns. I mean, if that's a plant, for instance. Tails or appendages that break off. Chemical defenses, if it's plants, sometimes, like poison ivy, chemical defenses. Camouflage is a big one, especially for prey, but predators have camouflage too. Warning coloration if it has some kind of toxin that's bad. Startle responses, a lanternfly with a false head, so that a predator will eat the false head and leave the real head alone. Flocking behavior, that's a great example. If it flies in a big flock, then there's less chance for the individual to be eaten, and more likely that your neighbor is going to get eaten than you, because it is hard to focus on one thing. So here we see an example of camouflage, a warning coloration. This is a poison dart frog. And here we see a false head. If this gets eaten, that's okay, because here's the actual head back here. Mimicry is really important. Batesian mimicry, which is the mimic lacks defenses of the organism it resembles. So a scarlet king snake mimics the venomous coral snake. So a milk snake also mimics a coral snake. So the coral snake is venomous, but the milk snake and the king snake are not. And so they mimic the venomous snake so that they get the benefit of the venomous snake. A Müllerian mimicry. Mimic shares a protective defense with the other, so the bumblebee and the yellow jacket, they both have that black and yellow because they both have the stinging toxin available. So here's the mimicry. They all have that black and yellow because they all share that, well, the yellow jacket and the bumblebee, they share that that venom, but the longhorn beetle, not as much. It and the flower fly, not as much. They are Batesian mimics of the other, which is Müllerian mimics. Symbiosis is another example of ways animals benefit each other. Parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism. So parasitism is the one that we're most familiar with. One animal is benefited and the other is harmed. Commensalism is one animal is benefited and the other has just, they don't care. They don't really care that the other one's there. And mutualism is they are both benefited. With parasitism, it can also be considered predation because one of them is basically eating the other. Parasitism, one of them derives nutrients from the host. With this one, though, they don't often try and kill the host because it's not a benefit to them to kill the host. If they kill their host, they have to go find another host. Why do they want to kill the host? It's not a benefit to kill the host. They just want to get nutrients from the host, and if they kill the host, they have to find another. So they really just want to get benefits from the host without killing it. Heartworms and leeches are great examples. Ticks and mosquitoes, also great examples, because those are types of parasites. Different kinds of worms like roundworms, intestinal worms, those are all parasites. Effects of parasites on the health of the host can range from slightly weakening them, and they can kill them over time, but that's not as typical. So here's some example of heartworms that's found inside a heart. Commensalism is a type of symbiotic relationship in which one species is benefited and the other is neither benefited nor harmed. Clownfish living within the tentacles of a sea anemone. Great example. The clownfish receives a benefit. Sea anemone doesn't really care. Many supposed examples may turn out to be either mutualism or parasitism. Cattle egrets stay near cattle, which flush out their prey from the vegetation. Egrets remove ectoparasites from the cattle. So that is actually mutualism because the cattle are getting the benefit of getting the ectoparasites removed from the cattle. So they're actually receiving a benefit, and that would be considered mutualism. So here's an example of the mutualism. The egret is getting the food, and the cattle is getting the ectoparasite removed. So mutualism is both are getting a benefit. And again, the egret and the cattle were a good example of that. The cleaning symbiosis is a good example. Bacteria in the human intestinal tract, that's a great benefit for us. The bacteria get food and we get our food digested. So that is a good example of mutualism. Plants and their pollinators, so the plants get pollinated and the pollinators get food. So this is a great example of coevolution. The plants evolved to get pollinated and the bees evolved to get the food that they need, the pollen and the nectar, so that they are able to build their hives and function that way. Coevolution. Clark's nutcracker, they get the nuts and the seeds, and then they are able to pollinate the plant and also to drop those nuts in other places to help move and disperse the seeds. Here's another example of a cleaning symbiosis. So this Fish is inside the larger fish's mouth, cleaning the inside of the larger fish's mouth. All right, so ecological succession. So this is the idea that how a ecosystem develops. So there's primary and secondary succession. Primary succession is starting from nothing, like from scratch. This is how bare rock goes from absolutely bare rock, nothing was here before, to a mature forest. And then secondary succession was there was something here before that was destroyed, and so we had something to start with, like bare soil, and now we can build up from that bare soil. So with primary succession is the formation of soil from exposed rock due to wind, water, and other abiotic factors. Secondary succession is disturbance-based, in which there was something like maybe a forest was there that got burned down by fire. And we don't have to start from scratch, from bare rock. We had some soil to start with. So both of these are going to start with something called a pioneer species. The pioneer species is the first thing that's going to come into the area. And pioneer species is usually something very basic, like a moss or an algae or a lichen, something like that is going to establish itself. So here is the rock lichen stage, and this is the primary succession. And the rock lichen, it is going to come into the area, and it might be brought in by a bird coming over, or blown in by the wind, or it might be carried in by a log on the water or something like that. And it creeps onto the rock, and then it gets on the rock, and its little tiny tendrils will get into the rock and kind of crack the rock open. And then as it dies, it leaves a little decomposition behind. And that little bit of decomposition starts to create a little bit of soil. And that soil leaves behind a little bit, and that little bit of rock starts to break down and leaves a little bit of soil behind. And that will gradually build up over a long time. Lichen dies, leaves a little bit, and then the rock starts to break up, and it starts to build up a little bit of soil until eventually we get to the plant and shrub stage. It's enough of that lichen breaks up that we get a little bit of dirt. And the little bit of dirt is allowing a little bit of plants to grow. Those little bit of plants are going to be carried over by the wind, or carried over by the water, carried over by a bird dropping a seed or something like that. And that's going to allow them to take root a little bit, and those roots are going to break up the soil a little bit more. Then they're going to die, and they're going to add their nutrients. And as they break down, that's going to add some more soil. Over time, we're going to add up some more lower trees and some lower bushes. Those are going to die. Their roots are going to break up even more rock, add some more soil, add some more, like as the leaves fall, that's going to add to the soil. And then eventually you're going to get to these taller trees. So this process takes a really long time. It starts with these pioneer organisms like the lichens, and then all of that dies, the rock gets broken up, and it's going to eventually lead to a mature forest. So here you can kind of see how it works with a secondary succession. It's much faster because we don't have to make soil from scratch. We don't have to start with the lichens. Our pioneers can be grasses, because we don't have to start with just lichens. We can start with some grasses and some smaller things, and we can build up much faster because we don't have to break up the rock, and we don't have to rely on the lichens to break up the rock. We can start at a much faster pace. Climax community is a mature forest that's stabilized and well developed. And that's what eventually we're hoping to reach in many of these secondary succession. And so secondary, of course, is already has soil present. So climax community is succession in a particular area will always lead to a mature and stable community, and that's what we're looking for. Climate and soil conditions determine whether succession results in a desert, grassland, or a forest. I mean, you're not going to get a forest if there's no rain. I mean, you may end up with a desert or a grassland or something like that. But that's what we're hoping for over time. And so you can get a facilitation model. Each stage facilitates invasion and replacement by organisms of the next stage. Inhibition model. Colonists remain and inhibit growth of other plants until the colonists are damaged or died. So sometimes the plants and animals that are there say, yeah, no, you can't come and start the next cycle until I'm gone. And so the next stage has to wait until the previous stage is done. The tolerance model is different types of plants can colonize an area at the same time. So they all tolerate each other. Accounts for grass, shrub, forest developments often seen. So grasses and shrubs and forests can all kind of grow at the same time in these cases. We don't know whether succession has an endpoint because the process may not be complete on Earth. We kind of are guessing at this. We haven't really seen it kind of end. All right, and I'm sorry, again, I'm trying to move fast because there are a lot of slides and I'm trying to get through them as quickly as possible. So in an ecosystem, populations interact among themselves. That's what ecosystems are, interaction between animals and plants on a large scale. Abiotic is non-living, biotic are living. So the abiotic components of an ecosystem are the non-living parts, atmosphere, water, and soil. Biotic are the living, so the autotrophs and the heterotrophs. Autotrophs are plants making their own food. Heterotrophs are the animals, the ones that need to eat for food. Autotrophs are the producers that are making their own food. And photoautotrophs are the plants and algae. And chemoautotrophs, these are usually the only ones that are found are in the hydrothermal vents in the ocean that make their food from chemicals. So producers, the bacteria, the chemoautotrophs, and then we have the photosynthetic ones. Consumers can come in many different forms. The heterotrophs that eat for their food. You can have herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, detrivores, and decomposers. Detrivores and decomposers are often confused. Detrivores feed on decomposing organic matter, and decomposers, organisms that feed on detritus. So they're very similar, really. And decomposers release inorganic substances which are taken up by the plants. So a lot of similarities between the two. Herbivores can come in lots of different shapes and sizes. They can be insects, they can be mammals. Anything that eats plants are considered herbivores. Carnivores, anything that eats meat. Decomposers, anything that breaks down anything else, fungi or bacteria. Now, energy flow, this is a weird idea, is that energy can either be created or destroyed. We've talked about this before, but energy only flows in one direction, and that is up the food chain. It starts with photosynthesis or chemosynthesis in plants and other autotrophs, but it can only go up the food chain, and energy is lost at each level of the food chain, and only 10% of the energy is actually moved up the food chain. So plants, if we consider plants to have 100% of the energy available from the sun, then an animal that eats a plant will only gain 10% of that energy. So that means that, let's say the plant has 100% of the energy, so that means that the herbivore only gets 10%. And then if something eats an herbivore, so let's see, the rabbit ate the plants, so that the rabbit only has 10%, and then a snake eats the rabbit, then the snake only gets 1% of the energy available. And then a hawk eats the snake, so this hawk only gets 0.1%. No, only gets 1%. So anyway, the idea is that you only get 10% each level you move up the energy, or each level you move up the food chain. And then the rest of that energy, 90% of the energy, is lost as heat. So energy eventually dissipates into the environment as heat. So the lower you are on the food chain, the more energy is lost, or the more energy that is available. This also explains why bigger animals like the whale can survive off of smaller things like krill, because krill are lower on the food chain and therefore contain more energy available. So smaller things on the food chain have more energy available because they have not lost it as much. So lots of energy lost as heat. Here's more energy lost as heat. Solar energy comes in to the producers, but energy is lost as heat every level of the food chain. And only 10% is carried on to the next level, 90% is lost as heat. Energy flows through an ecosystem via photosynthesis. Organisms use organic molecules to fuel their own metabolism. Additional energy is lost through excretion, defecation, organisms that die without being consumed. Cellular respiration, heat to the environment. That's where most of the energy goes. Energy to carnivores, energy to detritus feeders. So food web, again, food web is important, and we do get some energy, but a lot of that energy is lost. A grazing food web begins with the producer. Insects, rabbit, and deer feed on the leaves. Birds, chipmunks, and mice feed on the fruits. They are the omnivores because they also feed on caterpillars. So omnivore is anything that eats both meat and plants. Detrital food web. Food for soil organisms such as earthworms. Fed on the earthworms are fed on by carnivores and invertebrates. Invertebrates may be eaten by shrews or salamanders. Earthworms are eaten by lots of things. Lots of things like to eat earthworms. So the food web is quite complicated. Lots of animals eat lots of different things, which is important. I mean, yeah, most of us like pizza, but we don't want to eat pizza every day for every meal. We can't get all the nutrients we need by eating one thing every day, every meal, because it's not healthy for us. We need a variety, just like animals need a variety. So it's important that animals eat a variety of things. But this is also why we can screw up the food chain very easily. You remove one thing from the food chain, you're removing a food source from many different things. So it's important that we don't disrupt the food chain however we can. We keep the food chain as stable as possible. We try not to remove anything because we don't know how we are disrupting it by just removing one object. So a food chain or food web is a diagram showing a single path of energy. So a food chain is 1, 1, 1. This is a food web. A food chain is just one flow from one to the other. A food chain is one to the other. A food web is more complicated. Trophic level is one to the next to the next. So this is one level, this is one level, this is one level. That's what a trophic level is. And then ecological pyramid is talking about each level you move up on the pyramid. And as I was saying, only about 10% of the energy of one trophic level is available to the next. So most of the energy is at the bottom, and then there's very little energy available at the top because only about 10% of the energy gets transferred each level you move up. So biomass is the number of organisms times the dry weight of the organism mass. So the more biomass is at the bottom, and there's less as you move up. So these top level predators are having to eat more and more and more because there's less energy available for those top level predators. So zooplankton are going to be a good energy source. All right, still moving on. Types of cycles: water, carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen. The biogeochemicals, life, geology, and chemical cycles. So those are fun words, biogeochemical cycles. Water, carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen. All of these things are cycled around in the environment. Energy goes in one level, in one direction. Other things, not so much. We know about the water cycle, but carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen go in circles. Even though energy only goes in one direction, the others do not. They go in cycles. So chemical cycling may involve some things being in a reservoir. So like the ocean is a great reservoir for water. Can't really access it because a lot of it is salty. Glaciers, another big reservoir for water. Can't really access that because a lot of it is frozen. Exchange pool and biotic community. Human activities result in pollution because they upset the normal balance of nutrients. So model for chemical cycling. So again, the ocean could be a reservoir, or it could also be like a big lake or something, and it could also be an exchange pool for the atmosphere, soil, and water. So there's a lot going on when we're talking about chemical cycling. So hydrological cycle is first for the water. The transfer rate is the amount of a substance that moves from one component of the environment to another within a specified time. Fresh water evaporates. We know that. Evaporation, condensation, transpiration. Condensation occurs in which vapor water, fresh water rises, collects, cools, and falls as rain. So condensation is water turning from a vapor to a liquid. Precipitation is on land, it enters the ground, surface water, or aquifers, and eventually returns to the ocean. So here we can see the basic water cycle. So precipitation is it falling down in the liquid form. Condensation is it, think of it like you have the condensation on the side of your glass. So that is because it is going from a vapor to a liquid form. Evaporation is going from a liquid to a gas form. We have runoff, which is the flowing off of the surface into a body of water. We have aquifers, which are under the ground. We can fill up those aquifers by allowing it to filter into the water. I came from Kansas, and all of our water was pulled from a huge aquifer underground called the Ogallala Aquifer. And that's where we got 100% of our water, which was depleting that aquifer at a very fast rate, a scary fast rate. There are many lakes and rivers that we can pull water from here in Boonville now. Or this part of Missouri, we can get a lot of water from the Missouri River. And of course, the Ozark area. The Ozarks is a great source of water as well. A lot of our fresh water is trapped in the icebergs, so melting ice caps can release that water, but if the ice caps melt too fast, then that can cause oceans to rise. So water cycle is important. The ocean is a big reservoir for the water, but that water is salty, so we cannot access it for drinking without removing the salt, which is a very expensive and time-consuming process, which, we can do, but again, money is an issue for that. So the water cycle, many of you know that and remember that from your school days. Carbon cycle is another pretty common one. This is one that is getting a lot of attention now that carbon, especially with global warming, because this is the big one with global warming. Carbon is trapped in living organisms, and so whenever we burn any type of living organism, whether it is a plant or an animal, or any type of fossil fuels like gases or coals or natural gases, or carbon emissions like from cars, or to heat our houses, or electricity or power plants, anything like that releases carbon dioxide into the air. And that carbon dioxide makes a nice big blanket on the earth, which warms the earth up. And so global warming is being caused by an excessive amount of carbon being released into the atmosphere and making a big blanket on the earth, making the earth warm up. much faster than it should. So carbon dioxide combines with water to produce bicarbonate ions. And this is creating acid rain problems, and the carbon dioxide combining with the water making acid rain. Bicarbonate in the water is in equilibrium with the carbon dioxide in the air. The total amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been increasing every year due to human activities such as fossil fuel combustion. So we can have carbon dioxide in the water, we can have it in the atmosphere, we can have it in animals breathing, we can have it in fossil fuels. Plants do take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. The problem is it is being released a lot faster than plants can take it in. So that is what we are seeing. The purple in this diagram is human activities and the green is natural activities. So we are releasing things faster than the plants can naturally take it in, which is causing a lot of issues in the environment that is causing the planet to warm up much quicker than the environment can handle. So yes, some of this is natural, but some of it is happening too fast. So the greenhouse effect, global warming and climate change, the release of carbon dioxide is acting like a blanket, and that's why it's called the greenhouse effect, is that what happens is a greenhouse allows the light to get through, but then it traps it and the heat bounces around inside the greenhouse, warming it up. Same thing is happening here. The light gets through, but the carbon dioxide makes it so that the light cannot escape, and it causes the heat to bounce around close to the earth, making it warmer. Glaciers will melt, sea levels will rise, coastal agricultural lands will be inundated with seawater, causing everything to, all the coastal areas to drown, and warmer winters, coral bleaching, all kinds of things will happen. So the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus from the ocean sediments moves onto land due to a geological uplift. Weathering of rock results in the deposition of phosphate ions. Phosphate ions become available to plants. Animals obtain phosphates by consuming producers. Death and decay returns phosphates to the soil. So this is a cycle just like carbon. Some phosphates run off into the aquatic systems. Excessive phosphorus levels can lead to eutrophication and over-enrichment of waterways. So it's a balance. We need some phosphorus to have our plants grow, but too much can cause issues. Again, the green represents natural and the purple represents human issues. Phosphate mining and sewage treatment plants are adding more phosphates back in than what is natural. But you can see this isn't quite as much of a problem as the carbon was. So there is more natural happening here than unnatural, which is a good thing. Then there's also the nitrogen fixation. And nitrogen fixation, nitrogen is very important as a fertilizer. Plants need nitrogen in order to grow, but there are only certain types of nitrogen that the plant can use, and so nitrogen fixation is usually done by bacteria in association with the plants, and they take the nitrogen from the air and turn it into a bacteria or a form that the plants can use. Nitrification, production of nitrates which plants can use as a source of nitrogen. Assimilation, plants take up ammonia and nitrates from the soil and use them to produce proteins and nucleic acids. Denitrification, conversion of nitrates to nitrogen gas. So that's taking the nitrate and turning it to a nitrogen gas. Once again, green for normal, purple for unnatural. So you can see with nitrogen, what we're really running into here is fertilizing problems. In the past, what we would see happen in nature was that plants would die, plants would get left on the ground, and then they would decompose and they would be able to return the nutrients to the soil. Well, now what we're doing is we're harvesting them and we're removing the plants, and so they are not getting left behind for their dead parts to go back into the soil. We are taking them away, and so that's why we need to add fertilizer to the soil to return those nitrogen, those phosphates to the soil. But that's causing problems because those fertilizers are running off into the water stream and being carried to different places, specifically to the Gulf of Mexico by all the runoff. And those fertilizers are causing like dead zones in the waterways as the fertilizers run off into the water streams. So fertilizing is helping the fields, but it is causing issues in the water systems. So nitrogen oxides and sulfurs are converted to acids when they combine with water in the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels, affects the lakes and forests, which are killing trees, and it is reducing agricultural yields, corroding marbles, metals, and stonework. So climate change is becoming an issue. Carbon dioxides, nitric oxides, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, methanes, and even water vapors are big contributors. Some factors are naturally produced, others are a result of increased of human impact. Cellular respiration and animal decomposition, among other natural occurrences, are releasing carbon dioxide, but the balance is getting skewed and not becoming a balance, really. Human fossil fuels use puts more CO2 into the system than can be recycled by natural processes. Nitrous oxide, because of agriculture and the use of fossil fuels, CFCs by industry and is destroying the ozone layer, and methane by the use of livestock, landfill, and agriculture is also causing issues. So deforestation, cutting down many trees, for especially in the rainforest. What the problem is with the rainforest is that the rainforest soil is really poor. And so, because the nutrients have been leached out by the amount of rain, people will cut down the rainforest and the soil will be good for a year or two. And then they run out of nutrients and the crops stop growing. And so they will cut down more forest and that forest will be good for a year or two. And then the crops stop growing, so they cut down more forest. And it's just a cycle that repeats over and over and over again. And the cycle repeating over and over and over is causing issues because the soil is just so poor in the rainforest because of all the rain. It's leaching the nutrients, and so it's an endless cycle, and it's destroying the rainforest little by little every year. But at the same time, it's easy for us to judge over here in America where we've got good soil. But as a mom, if it came down to me and I had to cut down the rainforest to feed my 4 children, I don't know what I would do. I mean, yes, it's easy for me to point fingers over here, but if I had to cut down the rainforest or feed my children, I would probably cut down the rainforest to feed my children, and that's coming from somebody who loves nature. So it really is a difficult choice to make. So human actions are important. Thoughtful changes can make a big impact. Look for the Energy Star product, use power-saving features, reduce, reuse, recycle, become an advocate for wiser use, spread the word, be knowledgeable, make smart choices, and tell others about them. Humans can make a difference, but it's going to take a lot of us working together to make that difference. Working together, humans are the only species able to protect and preserve Earth's balance for future generations, but we have to do it together. Here's the Energy Star. It tells you what the product is and how much energy it uses and how much can be changed and how much can be saved. All right, we made it. I was trying to keep it under 45 minutes, and we made that goal. 1 chapter left, you guys. We can do it, and then that is the last chapter. After 1 more left, and then it'll be our last chapter for this semester. So let's do this, you guys. We'll see you next chapter. Bye.